Welcome back to a very special episode of Wrist Check Podcast. If you've been watching, you know every episode is a very special episode.
Yes.
Tonight, we have a very special guest, a member of a watch club that is near and dear to us. We have our friend, Akbar, visiting from DC.
Yes.
Watch collector and founder of a watch company, Lesablier.
Pleasure to meet you guys, man. Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolute pleasure. My name is Perry.
And I'm Rashawn.
And this is another episode. Before we move into the main event, if you've been watching, and I know you have, we have to have what is called our honorary wrist check. As is tradition, we start with the man who, quote unquote, never repeats a watch, but he's repeated a few and we'll hold it against him because they're just too good not to wear again.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, what do you got on the wrist tonight, sir?
So I'm wearing the usual suspect. I had to put a very special timepiece down, which we'll share. I found this watch to be just fitting. It is my Rolex Datejust Vignette dial.
Flex.
You know, that pop of blue with like that burst that comes out and there's a little like, you know, black on the minute tracks is like super, super cool. And then the diamonds add
some gradient action.
It's some gradient action. The diamonds just makes it that quiet luxury. And we were talking off camera and Akbar was sharing his love affair for watches and how it started with kind of like we call the dad watch, right? 36 millimeter Datejust, because that was the only option you had.
The best option it still is.
Still is. And so, you know, this piece for me also is a tribute to my dad. So I found it fitting to actually wear this watch. And I mean, I always get excited every time I look down at it. It really just like, you know, signifies, you know, where I've come from in my watch collecting journey and even in my life.
You've come very far, my friend.
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Yeah. Respect.
Yes.
We'll save our guest of honor for last. I'm wearing a new watch. This was a gift from a very dear friend, two dear friends.
Yes.
Who we just had on the show for the second time very recently. By the time you see this episode, that episode will have aired. But I am wearing the True North Watch Co. Palm Beach Wind Vintage Edition.
Yes.
This was a collaborative piece that our friends Eric Wind and Charlie Dunn did with True North Watch Company. And so if I know the story correctly, based on what Eric told me, the gentleman who founded this company is a big vintage Rolex collector. He has a profession where he uses his hands a lot and he bumps his watches. And he doesn't like to because if you're into vintage Rolex, they become quite valuable. So he founded this company where he could, I think he's a photographer. I think that's what he does.
Yes.
And he founded this company, True North Watch Company, where he's making homage pieces of some of his favorites. So he still gets that feeling on the wrist because if you like vintage Rolex, you know, you get what that is, right? There's a feeling in which how they used to make it that doesn't exist today. And if that's what you like, it's kind of romantic. You know, you like the jingly jangly, you like the weight, you like the case shapes, like all of these little nuances in the design language you appreciate from back in the day. And so he founded this company so he could make homage pieces that he could wear while he was working because the watches have become too valuable to wear just anywhere. And so this is I guess we say an homage or a replica of a vintage Daytona that's partly inspired by Eric's love of the game Uno.
Yes.
Which he plays at home with his children. And so you'll notice all the colors are there. You've got the green bezel, and then you've got a yellow 24-hour subdial. And that 24-hour subdial is an AM, PM subdial. You've got a red 60 seconds counter, and you've got a blue 60-minute counter for the chronograph. And I totally get it. It's a lot of fun. This has become my new, I guess we should say, since that's thing now, dad watch.
Yes.
This is the watch that I wear when I drop my daughter off at school. This is the watch I wear when I go grab a cup of coffee. I've been wearing it all week. I absolutely love it. Eric is a dear friend of the pod, and we will be catching up with him again very, very soon in Palm Beach.
Yes.
So shout out to Eric Wind. Shout out to True North Watch Company. You got another hit. And I'll just put out there, we're responsible for some sales. Because I've had some people hit me up who said they weren't able to get this watch and they bought 3 or 4 other watches instead.
Yes.
So True North Watch Company will be talking to you very soon.
You also gave this watch a really cool nickname. You called it the Wintona.
I did call it the Wintona.
That's good.
In an
good.
Instagram post. Yes. I'm good for a caption every now and again. I've been known to rival Drake.
Yes.
That's how good I am. But no, I called it the Wintona, and it's just a lot of fun, man. It's when you like watches, it's you like the really great stuff, the expensive things and whatever. Like, we often don't really look at it for the prices because we're just fans of the brands. But it is nice occasionally to wear something that's kind of like a palate cleanser, right? That no one takes too serious. You're not really worried about, but it still gives you that same excitement and feeling. And this does that for me. So shout out to those guys.
Yes.
Akbar, you've got a very special watch on the wrist. This one happens to be one of your own. Break it down for us.
So just like Rashawn, I'm doing a little gradient vignette action.
Okay.
I've got our own watch, the Lesablier Travel Graph, our upcoming world timer, but I have it in the smoked ruby color.
Ooh.
It's sort of a fume effect on a deep red dial. We've done green previously and everyone loved it. And I figured, you know what, rather than doing the same thing again, let me try the exact opposite color. So it's a deep red fume dial. It goes from black to red. And I really like the way it makes the Arabic numerals pop out.
Yeah.
It's a white BGW9 loom printed numerals over the black part. So it gives it a nice contrast. A lot of work went into this dial. I tried to make it a double fume. Like I tried to make the chapter ring fume as well. We couldn't make that work, but I'm still glad it turned out the way it did. I'm really proud of this watch.
And it's a world time, right?
It is, yeah. So it's a world time. And in fact, the New York listeners aren't going to love this, but this is the only world timer that I know of in existence that for the Eastern time zone, it's DC, not New York. Our brand is from DC.
Yes.
We were born in DC. I wasn't, but the brand was.
Yeah.
So, we were not going to make a world timer without DC on it.
Yeah, no, paying homage to the roots. I love that. This episode of WCP is sponsored by Bezel, a trusted marketplace for buying and selling watches. With over 18,000 and counting watches listed from both private sellers and professional dealers, you have your pick of the litter from brands like Rolex, AP, Patek, and more. Bezel is one of the highest rated marketplaces for watches. Inside the Bezel app, you can make offers on watches, buy them outright, bid at auction, all with confidence knowing each timepiece is authenticated by an in-house team of experts. For more information, visit getbezel.com or search Bezel in the App Store and download the app today.
Yes.
So getting into things, you did bring up the fact that like you have DC in place of New York there for this specific time zone. And I think that's relevant, not only just because of that's where the watch brand was born, but we met in DC.
Yes.
And we met as part of the official CP Time Watch Club, which was founded by our really good friends, Albert Coombs and CQ. So I want to get into first, because I always find this really interesting when nut jobs like you decide you're going to start a watch company, because I think it's the craziest thing to do. But I really admire you guys for doing it. But you started as a watch collector.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to know what spawned your love affair with timepieces, and how did that escalate into you creating Lesablier?
It's a long story, but it's a good one. As I was talking to Rashawn about this earlier today, excuse me. My dad's first watch that he bought when he got a paycheck was very similar to what Rashawn's wearing today. 116234, I believe, is the reference.
Okay.
Two-tone Datejust. And it is the most dad watch of dad watches out there. Two-tone, white dial. In the 80s, my dad bought it when he, was first acquired the means to do so. And growing up, I used to see this watch on his wrist. And my mom sat me down and told me this story when I didn't even know anything about what a job was or a paycheck was. I was like 6 or 7. And my mom said that like when your dad worked hard, the first money he made for himself, he bought this watch, and his grandfather did the same. Well, my grandfather, his father, did the same thing.
Cool.
And me being a kid, not knowing anything about watches, I just thought it was so cool that he had a memory of that on his wrist. And I would see him, he wore that watch every single day. Now he wears an Apple Watch. I'm trying to fix that. But, he wore that watch every single day, and I just got used to seeing it. That's what sort of spawned my love, which I'll get to later, for two-tone watches. But since then, my dad, he's not a watch guy at all, but he collects art and antiquities. And he'd bring home these Sotheby's catalogs, Christie's catalogs, Bonhams, and there was always a watch auction somewhere in those catalogs. And I remember he'd bring these home, and when I was like 10, 11 years old at this point, I would flip through, I would ignore all the like ancient stuff that I don't know or care much about, and I would go to the watches. I still remember being a kid, it was the poster of an auction that was happening. I forget which one, but it was a black backdrop, and it was a gold Zenith era Daytona with a black dial. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, that is just, I don't know what this is. I don't know anything about this. I was a kid at the time, and I just thought it was beautiful. And I think that's the moment that, you know, after I saw my dad's watch, and then that, I decided I was just going to be into watches. And I was young at the time. You know, I had no means to purchase anything.
So what was like some of the first items that you were into? So the timepieces.
I liked the gold Daytona. You know, I was.
So that's where you started.
Yeah.
It was like straight into it. You know what looks really good on my wrist? Gold Daytona.
From there, I know everyone's going to hate me for saying this, but I was really into the integrated bracelets, 70s and 80s watches.
Sure.
And this is before there was any sort of hype for them. Like we're talking, you know, almost 15, 18 years ago now.
Right.
So back then I saw an AP in one of the auction catalogs. It was I still remember, it was the owl, you know, the date owls.
Yes.
And I saw that. I just thought these were so cool. And back then I was that weird kid at school talking about these random European names that nobody could pronounce. And they were like, okay, like, you know, just go play outside or something. But I was a nerd growing up. I played video games, and as such, I had a lot of internet access, and I would just go look up watches. I would Google stuff, learn about them. My two things that I learned a lot about were cars and watches. So I would just sit at home, Google things, read things, go on all the forums that existed at the time. Like, you know, Watch You Seek and all that a bit later. But it was a hobby that I sort of felt peerless in the sense that now a lot of people are into watches. We have wonderful communities, like you mentioned, Al and CP Time. But back then, there was not really a place to talk or learn about watches much. So I, you know, had a bunch of fashion watches when I was a kid because that's what I got as gifts. And I remember I moved to the United States for college. And I had a little bit of an allowance from my parents, not a big one by any means, but I came here, and every little dollar that I could scrounge up, I created my first eBay account. And I was just bidding on things left and right.
Nice.
I remember my good friend Matt. He is my best friend to this day. And he was the first person that I was able to talk watches about when I moved to America. We'd sit in the dorm room together in college, and we'd bid on eBay for watches. The first watch I bought with my own money, it was a Tag Heuer Professional. It was with the granite dial, the same one Obama was seen wearing all the time. And I just thought it was $109. I remember because back then people weren't into watches.
Yeah, it's true.
But $109. It was an auction in the Philippines. And I was like, I don't even.
So random.
I don't even know if this is going to get here. But I bought it, and that sort of sparked my love for older watches. I really got into vintage. I bought a lot of stuff that was off the beaten path a little bit. I remember at the time I would see the Nautilus in the windows, and I would think, oh, one day I want to own one of those. I'd see a Royal Oak in the window, and I just thought they were so weird at the time. People didn't know what they were. They were off the beaten path. I liked things of weird shapes, you know, square, circle, like offset, like a oval, things like that. I just thought that it was so cool that this is a watch that doesn't look like the watch that everyone else has at the time. So I bought a bunch of stuff like that, more in my budget. I bought a vintage Zenith Defy.
Great watch.
Yeah, I love that watch. And that's actually, I'll get to it in a bit, but that's what inspired Lesablier, that watch.
I can see it now that you mentioned that.
Yeah, we're going to talk at some point about the Sport Classic. And that was directly inspired by that Defy that I bought. I remember, again, it was an eBay win. It was $312. It was an auction from Bulgaria. And I won it, and I was like, man, this is the coolest thing in the world.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
When you can get some of these pieces for dirt cheap.
Make off with the bandit.
So I went from scrounging up every dollar I had to buying these watches. I had an oval Omega Genève. You know, I had a bunch of these weird 70s, 80s watches.
So the 70s was like really your vibe in terms of like watch design. Like,
it is. And it is in cars too. You know, I love 70s cars. I love that whole era of things. I wasn't alive in the 70s, but I can respect it. You know, it was an era when people were just doing crazy, different, off the wall stuff. It brought us some of the best parts of culture. It brought us some of the best parts of art, watches, everything.
I agree. I think it's interesting when you think about it because the 70s, right, is directly out of sort of the 60s counterculture.
Yeah.
Like when everyone was like, I mean, let's be honest, experimenting with drugs.
Yes.
During the 60s.
They were definitely seeing shapes.
And lots of changes like politically and stuff like this. I think it's interesting when you consider like what comes out of those periods. And this was a period where everyone was kind of like self-reflecting and figuring out who they were.
Right.
And then you usher in the 70s and people are like, individuality is like a thing, like expressing yourself, like trying to find new ideas, designing new things and shapes, like really an incredible era for design, period.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that drew me to it. You know, I went to, college. Everyone was wearing the same sort of watches. Everyone was wearing your very traditional looking. Back then, Daniel Wellington was a big thing.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into my thoughts on that, but I just got tired of seeing the same old thing on everyone's wrist, and it didn't appeal to me. I wanted things that were weird. I wanted things that, I looked at and I was like, I don't see this everywhere I go. Right. And again, it sounds so weird saying this in 2024 or 5, whenever this episode airs. But back then, a Nautilus or an Aquanaut or a Royal Oak, that was something weird.
Yeah,
that was something odd.
It was strange.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when I finally was able to purchase, I'd scraped together about $5,000. And my parents were like, okay, like, we know you love watches. Why don't you buy yourself a Cartier or a Breitling or something like that? And I said, no. And I found this Royal Oak. It was a two-tone Royal Oak.
Wow.
This was in 2014 or 15. I don't recall. And I negotiated again through eBay. I negotiated it. I got it for $4,500.
Incredible.
And yeah, I did. I actually did. $4,500. It was from a sketchy 46th Street dealer in New York. Of course. In the photo, the screws were offset and everything. It was not a great condition watch.
Yeah.
But I loved it. And it was a two-tone, which I love two-tone watches. Like I said, my dad's Datejust it was sort of the gateway drug for me to get into this.
Right.
And I saw that watch and my parents were like, are you sure? We've never heard of this brand. This is kind of a weird watch. It's from the 90s. It was also a birth year watch for me.
Okay.
It was a year. Yeah, I like that sort of thing. I like watches to have significance.
Sure.
It was a year off of my birth year, but close enough,
Yes.
And I remember getting that watch and I posted it on Reddit because I was a big Reddit guy at the time and I got flamed for it.
Did you?
Yeah, people were like, "What is this watch? Is so ugly. This is the cheapest. Oh, you bought the cheapest AP you could possibly buy. Like this and that."
Well, because the Royal Oak wasn't hot back then.
It wasn't.
Yeah. No, it was all about the offshore, and the millenary was still a thing.
Right, and I used to love the millenary. I thought that was
a great watch,
incredible watch. I would wear that watch around, and nobody would know what it was. Nobody would comment on it. My parents were really unsure about this because they were like, "Yeah, you're spending all this money that you saved up. We're not giving you anything. We're giving you a little bit of an allowance.
Yeah.
You sure you want to blow $5,000 on something that you don't know anything about?" I'm like, I know a lot about this. You guys might not.
Yes.
But I got that watch and I loved the hell out of it. I
still have it?
No, I don't have it. I wore it for about 6-7 years and I got the opportunity to buy another Grail watch of mine and I sold it in order to purchase
Sold it for a profit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Nice. Little bit.
Nice.
A few multiples of what I purchased it for. But I did really I had a lot of experience with that watch. I had it refinished by AP. I had LA Watchworks take a look at it as well. Just owning that watch. And it was a 36 millimeter. I love smaller watches. That's another thing.
Same.
A lot of people complain about Lesablier that most of the watches we make are pretty small. And a lot of our designs are vintage inspired and I like vintage. So yeah, our watches are going to wear a little smaller than more contemporary sort of designs. But that's what I bought. The Royal Oak was like I said, it was a 1990s D serial. 14790 was the reference, and it was 36 millimeters, and I thought it was the perfect watch. I love that thing, and I beat the hell out of it. It was a two-tone, and you know when you beat the hell out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It shows.
Yes.
It does.
But yeah, that sort of led me to eventually realizing that I want to start buying stuff that isn't at that level. I don't want to wear a Royal Oak every day. I love it, but it's not the kind of thing that I want to wear all the time. And it's also, as much as I love it, it's also a watch that's very like, everyone has one, everyone knows about it. I wanted to make something that's really personal, something that's very different, very special, something that has a bit of a story to it.
Right.
So I began just buying parts off of Ofray, Esslinger, these random websites online, eBay as well. And I started just putting stuff together in my college apartment at the time in DC.
Okay.
And I would just sit in my coffee table and assemble these things. I broke more watches than I made.
Okay.
A lot of broken stems, a lot of bent hands. But I would buy stuff and I'd print the dial out of printer paper to start with. Just throw some ridiculous stuff together.
Yeah.
And then I started 3D printing cases.
Wow.
Our college had the school I went to, they had a 3D printer in the library.
So you were teaching yourself watchmaking?
I was, yeah. And I have terrible motor skills. Like my hands are very shaky, but I love doing it.
What were you referencing at this particular time to even like put these parts together and like know which parts to get?
YouTube videos.
Okay.
I was watching just sort of taking them apart and breaking them. That's the best way to learn.
Incredible.
Messing around with it. My day job was, and what I studied was software engineering. A big part of software engineering, anybody who's watching this who's a software engineer will know, like the best way you learn is by creating bugs, by breaking it. So I learned a lot. I learned the stem lever and all that, the amount of times I broke a stem. I learned to be gentler by putting hands on every time I bent a handset.
Okay.
And I started, like I said, I went to 3D printing.
So literally trial and error.
Trial and error, yeah. I never went to watchmaking school. I was a big design person. I like to make things. I would draw stuff all the time. I would sit at home and just draw watches. I wouldn't make them, but I would draw them. So if I could ever find them, I hope I have them somewhere, but of my first few sketches of watches. And at one point, I just decided to 3D print cases. I would use my school's library's 3D printer.
Yeah.
And I'd print out these cases and I'd put them together. And somebody came to me at one point and was like, you should sell these. And I thought it was a silly idea. I just made them for myself. It was just something I made. It was a fun project. I'd wear them around college. Then another person came and told me I should sell them. And then a third, fourth, fifth. And then I was like, you know what? Why not? But seeing as I never went to watchmaking school, I broke more watches than I actually made. I decided to stick to the design aspect of it and find watchmakers to make them. So I set out to find manufacturers for dials, set out to find case manufacturers, and I just sort of threw some ideas together. And in 2016, I decided I was going to start a brand. It took about a year to build the first watch. I didn't do any I did Kickstarter on it. But I also just funded it myself, I got some help from my family, but I sort of put money together and just created a line of watches. And the first watch I made, called Aventurine VQ, or AVQ for short. It's a 24-hour only watch. It's a pilot's watch. I'm big into aviation. I'm currently pursuing my private pilot's license.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to make a watch that was useful for pilots. So it's a pure 24-hour watch inspired by the 1960s Flieger watches, like, the Air Flight, amongst others. And I wanted it to have a very tool watch aesthetic. I wanted it to have something that it's just very 60s, but very utilitarian.
Sure. So
it had a lot of contrast on the dial. It was very easy to read. I launched it and then I realized a lot of people don't know how to read 24-hour time.
Yeah, no.
So...
Which seems simple. It's like, but if you're not used to it.
In theory, there's 24 hours in a day. There's
just minus 12.
Right. Or, a 24-hour watch has 24 ticks on it. So it should make sense, but it didn't sell very well to start out. I admit our first launch was not a widespread success.
Right.
And I took that and I learned from it. I thought, why don't I make something that's more personal to me, more out there, more crazy, and something that just... I really love. Put more of my personality into it, put more of what I collect into it. And that's sort of what got me into building Lesablier anyway, building the brand is I figured as a college student at the time, there was nothing that I really loved under $1,000.
Right.
Back then, we didn't have so many wonderful micro brands like we do now.
You didn't. Yeah, no, this is truly a special time.
Right. So I thought okay, let's say as a college kid, you manage to scrounge together $1,000. Your choices are a mall watch.
Yep.
or a Tissot. I love Tissot. Nothing against them. I've purchased them before.
But just limited options.
But limited options. Yeah. And everything you bought, it was very manufactured. It was there was nothing that gave you the independent feel. I've been into Journe since I was like 14, 15. I've been into brands like MB&F since I was that young. And the thing that drew me to these brands was the fact that like your watch is not like a off the press,
Yes.
Somebody actually sat there and built it. If you want to talk to Francois Paul, or if you want to talk to Max Busser, you can meet him at an event and talk to him.
Yes.
You can talk to everyone involved in the brand. You can talk to everyone involved in the process. You can't do that with Tissot.
You can't.
You can't. As much as I love the brand, you can't do it with Seiko.
Yeah, it's true.
They have, a marketing team of probably 40 people. I don't know.
Big conglomerates.
Big conglomerates. So I wanted to give that feeling that, listen, I graduated college, or I got married today, and I want a watch that I can always remember that there's something special. I talked to the guy who made it, and you know that it's not just something that you go to the mall and you buy and you walk out and you keep the receipt in your bag because you think you might return it one day.
So let me ask you the name Lesablier.
Yeah.
Where, because you're not French.
I'm not. No. Yeah. What gave it away?
What inspired you to use this name?
It's going to sound a little cheesy, I admit, but I took French in high school. I love the language. One of the reasons I took French is because it's the language of watchmaking.
Facts. Yes, it is.
Yeah, Switzerland, especially
French. They all speak French. Yes.
Right. French Switzerland is the home of watchmaking.
Yes.
And, while I knew I wasn't moving to Switzerland, I was moving to America. I learned French throughout high school. I was fluent in it. I am not anymore after moving to America. 11 years here will do that to you.
Sure.
But I love the language, and I get a lot of flack for it. I know. The amount of time people tell me it's a stupid name, the amount of time people tell me that I'm not French enough to use it. But I think the name isn't French. Lesablier translates to the hourglass.
That's awesome.
And that's really cool.
Thank you. My thinking behind it is when you see an hourglass, the first word that pops in your head is the word time.
Yeah, of course.
I want to make watches that are different, that they stand out. You see it, the first word that pops in your head, I want it to be Lesablier.
Yes.
I don't want to make a watch that blends in and looks like any other watch. And unfortunately, that's the state of the watch market today. Is there's so many watches, if you cover the logo with your finger, you wouldn't be able to tell what brand it is.
Sure.
And I wanted to get as far away from that as possible. I wanted the brand to be iconic. I wanted it to be something that you're like, yeah, that's a Lesablier.
Yeah.
So I thought French was the correct language for it. Being the birth of watchmaking, the home of watchmaking is, like I said, French Switzerland. And I went with it for a name. I thought of many different options. I came up with so many different things, but I wanted something that stood out. We're based in DC. One of the thoughts was District Watch Company, but it didn't have that level of individuality to it. It sounds kind of generic. You pick the first thing. So I wanted something unique. I wanted something that stands out. And I wanted something that brought it back to the thought behind the brand, making it feel special, making it feel like, it's something truly unique, which it is, I believe.
Yeah. No, it really is. Please.
What I find very, very interesting is that you come flying out of the gate with one of the most complicated watches to make, that being a world time and the price point being very, very approachable. What was it that inspired you to kind of just like come kicking in the door with something this bold?
So the world timer, it took a long time. When I started Lesablier and I made the 24-hour watch, I actually already had a world timer design drawn up, but I had no way to execute it at the time. Right. And I kept thinking about how am I going to make this one day? I love world timer watches. My dad, again, he's very dear to me. His dream watch is a Patek world timer, specifically the 5131, the enamel dial, Clozione enamel dial world timer. And my dad, like I said, he's not into watches, but he loves that. My family is not in the United States, and I wanted to make something that, it has personal significance to me. And I just think it's a very useful complication. I think for people who travel, people who have relatives overseas, people who have business overseas or in another American time zone even, it's so practical to just be able to tell the time in all of these time zones. It doesn't take any work. You look and it just tells you.
100%.
There's some world timers you have to rotate a bezel. There's some world timers you have to, turn something or the other.
Pusher.
But I wanted to make something similar to like the Patek world timer in the sense that, you set it and forget it.
Yes.
It's set once. So the idea was from 2016-17 when I started the brand. But at the time, the only movement available to me to be able to do that with were the ETA and Sellita GMT movements. And these would have priced the watch at a much, much higher level. I didn't feel ready at the time to come out of the gate with a $3,000 watch or a $2,500 watch. It's a big ask as a new brand.
Right.
Some brands pull it off, but they have extensive marketing budget. They have connections in the industry. I don't have any of that. So I wanted to wait until it was right. And over the years, the design evolved. I did an event in June, when I launched the World Timer, where I sort of went through the progression of what that design looked like. And a couple of years ago, both Miyota and Seiko released a GMT movement. Miyota, the 9075, and Seiko, the NH34A. This was the first time that there was an affordable GMT movement on the market. That wasn't the Sellita, I think it's the SW330 or the ETA 2893. I jumped at that opportunity. The second I saw that, I was like, you know what? You could easily take a GMT watch and reconfigure it to be a world timer. You already have a 24-hour function in a GMT.
Correct.
So I began working with it. The second I figured out that movement came out, I started redrawing the watch. I started trying to make it again and trying to see that, listen, you can't really buy a world timer under $1,000. There's not many options.
No.
At the time that I was making this watch, there was maybe one option in the entire world that did this. Frederic Constanta, incredible world timer.
Yeah.
It's $4,000.
Yes.
Nomos, similar, $4,500. So I thought, why can't I make this at a price that, is more reachable to people?
Yeah.
The movement's not that expensive. It is more expensive than most off-the-shelf movements, but I wanted to take that and put it into the case finishing, whatever I wouldn't spend on the ETA, put it into the case finishing, put it into the design. One thing with Lesablier is we don't share catalog parts. When you go to, other than the movement, I have to add that. But when you go as a watch company to make a watch from a dial maker, you go to a case maker, they pull out a big old book. And there's 30 case designs in it, 30 dial designs in it, 30 hand designs, and they let you pick it out, just like you're configuring a car or something like that.
Interesting.
Yes.
Or you could tool everything from the ground up. And that's what we do.
Wow.
We don't share our components.
So what was that process like? Like, I know like you were sketching like designs,
Yeah.
but there's a difference between like sketching something and then like actually like building it and figuring out if this actually works in real life.
Absolutely. And it's a very frustrating process.
Yeah, bet.
You draw something that you really like, and then you send it to the case maker, for example. They will look at it and they will spend some time with their engineers, with CAD, with all the people who are experts of material sciences and that sort of thing. And then they're going to go into it and be like, okay, we can do this. We can't do this. We can do the brushing here, but we can't do the polish here. They sort of give you what they can do and what they can't do. And they come back at it with a sort of revised design. Then I either like it or I hate it. I send it back. They make more changes and we go back and forth for, in the case of this watch, years.
Wow.
The first drawing of the travel graph that we're using the new movement, actually, it wasn't even when the new movement came out, but the travel graph as we know it, the first drawing of something resembling it was in 2021.
Okay.
And we went back and forth for years trying to like perfect the design, make it not too thick. One thing I'll get into once we start talking about it specifically is the position of the 24-hour disc. It's below the dial.
Yes,
I noticed that.
Yeah, and that's something that, yes, it takes a bit away from the legibility of the watch. I admit it. But I thought it's cool. I wanted a depth to the watch.
Yes.
I wanted you to feel like it's a 3D, there's multiple fields of stuff on the watch. You have the main dial above, because your local time is what you're going to look at every minute, every hour.
Correct.
And then behind that is the world time function.
Yeah.
So it took a long time just to engineer making the dial multiple levels, putting the world time disc, the GMT disc below the dial. So just little things like that you'd think, oh, it's so simple. It's not.
No.
It takes multiple rounds of going back and forth. If you were to pick it out of a catalog, it would be easy. It's a one-step process. But if you're going to tool everything, it takes time. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. So we went back and forth on this watch for years to get it right. And I'm proud to finally, we're delivering it in December of 2024.
And that's this specific model with the Aventurine dial?
So that's one of them. We have four colors for it at this point. We have another color that we're going to unveil later on. But these four colors are going to begin deliveries in late November, early December of this year, being 2024.
That's incredible. And how many units did you produce?
For this one, we made 50 in each color.
15 each color. Okay.
Yeah, 50 in each color. The Aventurine one, we were blessed to have sold out of them within the first 20 hours after launch. Aventurine is something we started in 2019. Back then, a few other brands did Aventurine, but it was not that popular. You know, it's a, pardon my language, but it's a pain in the ass to make an Aventurine dial.
Yes.
You're safe here.
It's a lot of work to make an Aventurine dial. For people that don't know what Aventurine is, at least Aventurine glass is what we make the dials out of.
Right.
Yes.
It's cobalt and glass essentially mixed together with inclusions in it that are made out of metal shavings, copper, zinc.
Until you get the sparkle.
Exactly. But you're also destabilizing the mixture, right?
Yes.
So you have to splice this thing at 0.3 millimeters, 0.2 millimeters.
Yeah.
That makes it very, very brittle.
Yeah.
It's no longer a solid piece of glass. Now it's a piece of glass with a bunch of what really are impurities in it.
Yeah,
Yes.
you'll break it like a potato chip.
Yeah, easily. So yeah, it's even easier than a potato chip to break.
Yeah.
So we break a lot of these dials in just making the watches.
Yeah.
Then it also factors into the thickness of the watch. People don't realize Aventurine adds a lot of thickness because it has to be thick enough to fit onto a dial base plate.
Yes.
And then that added thickness to the dial means the watch has to be able to accommodate a thicker dial.
Yes.
So that goes back to the case design, that the case has to be able to accommodate Aventurine or even malachite or other stones. They require extra consideration. It's not as simple as just slapping a stone on the dial and calling it a day.
Yeah.
So we did it first in 2019 on our Sport Classic.
Yes.
At this time, only a couple other brands did Aventurine, and I loved it. I saw it across some of other like big brand watches. I saw it in a couple micro brand watches. It really drew me because Aventurine, it's dazzling.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
You look at it, anybody can tell from a distance that, whoa, what the heck is that?
That's what I was going to get at, because when we had met in DC, when I seen that watch in your wrist, I think because we didn't get to spend much time together, I was telling Perry, I said, yo, man, what was that on this guy's wrist? And I was blown away, and I was extremely enamored by it because I knew it was something I had never seen before, but I didn't think that it would have been your own watch. And so I was extremely impressed when we linked up again in DC and I did more homework and more research on the watch to be like, man, this is absolutely phenomenal. And what I love about the Aventurine on, the travel graph is that it has a lot more sparkle than you'll find in other examples.
That's on purpose. Our first watch, the Sport Classic, we did it better each time. So the Sport Classic was the first time we ever sold out of a watch. And it was our Aventurine version, the Supernova. We made 50 of those and they were gone instantly. And that's where I sort of realized, I'm like, wow, not only do I love this, but it seems like people are responding well to this.
And how are the people finding you?
Mostly through Instagram.
Okay.
A lot of the times we do a lot of events, like the one we met at.
We met at District Time. We met before then, but we ran into you at District Time.
Right. And CP Time, we go to these events. We meet a lot of people at these, and I love doing it. I love watches. I can talk about watches for as many hours as there are in a day.
Yeah.
But we just like to be out there and show people our stuff. So we go to a lot of car events as well. I'm on Facebook. There's a lot of micro brand Facebook
So
groups.
It's interesting because this is something I talk about when I talk to brands, even particularly Swiss brands.
Right.
Is I like to talk to them about having a really good ground game. And what I describe as a ground game is one where you're actually touching the people.
Right.
Right. You're engaging the clubs. You're headed at events. You're bringing product with you. You're getting watches on wrist. This type of action and engagement is what wins people over and allows brands to build their own community.
Absolutely. And this ties me back into the whole reason I started Lesablier is I wanted it to be when you buy one of these watches, I want you to reflect on how you got it, how you ended up finding the brand. I want it to evoke a memory. I want to be out there meeting people. I want to be out there talking to people. You buy something, even from a big brand, you buy a Rolex, you're not going to meet Hans Wildorf, or I think that's his name. Yes. But, firstly, I don't think he's alive anymore. But secondly, even if he were, you wouldn't be able to meet the people behind it. You wouldn't be able to hear the story behind the watch.
Yeah, Jean-Frédéric Dufour is not taking one-on-one meetings.
Right. Especially at a watch of this price range, something below $5,000 even say 10,000. How many brands below 10,000 can you actually go and meet someone who was involved in putting it together or designing it? So I wanted to get out there, meet people, share the story of the brand. Marketing is not something I do well, I have to admit. And like I said, I'm an engineer by trade. I just like to make watches.
Yeah.
And I could definitely work on that, work on the marketing aspect of it. But we put all our money into the R&D of the watches, into the actual producing them.
Well, I would argue that you actually are a good marketing person because you're doing the work that matters. You know, it's one thing to like build a social media following and like have really great posts, but it's a whole nother thing to actually get outside and touch the people. And that's the work that actually really matters and makes a difference. That's the reason why you're selling out.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And to me, that's the work I enjoy the most. You know, like for me, some brands spend 10,000 on an ad campaign or 20,000 on an event. For me, I would rather put that money into making the watch and selling it at a better price, making it affordable, and us still being able to get out there and meet people, rather than doing all these expensive, extravagant like photo shoots and all these things. I no disrespect against that, by the way.
Sure.
They make incredible photos. They make for incredible marketing material. Maybe we'd sell more watches if we did that. But I'd rather put it into building the watch. You can see on all these watches, like a lot of thought, a lot of time went into it, a lot of effort went into it. And another thing that I'm starting to learn is that I priced them too low every time I made them. I made barely any profit off of these watches. This is not a main moneymaker for me. You know, I'm blessed to have other sources of income. I do this because I love doing it. I do this because it's something I'm passionate about. And as such, I can keep the prices where they are, but not spending an absurd amount of money on marketing or PPC enables me to do that.
Yeah. Well, at this time, right, when this airs, this would have long have passed, but we had a conversation with Watchmakers United. Perry held one on Saturday and I held one on Sunday. And I think something that was very synonymous is either you have an issue with the margins, right? Because it's so expensive to make the watch. But then in your case, you kind of have the bad problem where, you know, you almost are selling them too low.
Right.
Which, you know, obviously is great starting out because you're exposing more people to the brand. You're giving everyone an opportunity to actually have a great talking piece. Right. Because anybody that's producing any watch right now with an Aventurine dial, you're talking about 30, 40, 50K.
Yeah.
And so much higher. So to be able to get this at sub 1,000.
Right.
And to be a complicated timepiece. It's one thing if it's Aventurine and it's time only.
Yeah.
No, it's Aventurine and it's also a world time.
Right. And I don't think there's any other Aventurine world timers out there. I think Anderson Genève makes one, but you know, that's like you said, it's 45,000, I think. It's more than that, actually.
Yeah.
Beautiful watch, by the way.
Amazing watch.
I'd love to own one of those someday. As such, I wanted to do something like we've all seen a world timer. We've all seen an Aventurine watch, but you haven't seen an Aventurine world timer.
No.
So I like to do stuff like that. I like to do stuff where it's like, this doesn't really exist. Yeah. So that's what, you know, long answer to a short question. That's why the travel graph exists.
Yeah. Yo, you know, Bezel just launched auctions?
Really?
Yeah, they did. You could bid on watches inside the app. They give you notifications on auction drops, and it's still authenticated. Oh, shoot, I won.
Yo, what you win?
Man, don't worry about me, man. Go download the app. Go visit getbezel.com.
Oh, come on, man.
So let's go through, I want to go through some of the stats.
Yeah.
The build quality is, I mean, you can feel it. It's
very hefty.
It's hefty, very solid. It's robust. This is a sports watch.
Yes,
it is.
Right. At the same time that it's a complicated timepiece. What kind of steel are you using?
This is 316L.
Okay.
I'm actually really glad you asked that. I'm working on a new watch right now, and I'm currently deciding whether to go 904 or 316. And the thing that I'm finding is 904 is significantly more expensive to produce than 316. Yes. I really like 904L steel. If you've ever, you know, held a modern Rolex and just the way that it takes to the polish, the way that the contrasts are between the brushes and the polishes, I'm trying to decide whether to do 316 or 904 on the next watch. But for this one, we stuck to 316. It's one of the ways that we can keep it under $1,000. It looks great as it is. You know, I feel like 904 looks better when there's a lot more dramatic changes in finish. You know, when you have the stark polish. Like you look at an Oyster bracelet from Rolex. The way that the center link contrasts from the side parts of the link. Yes. That's where the 904L steel really shows.
Yes.
They make it so crispy. So we're currently in the process of deciding whether we're going to use 904 on our future watches or not. And I still haven't made that decision yet. But yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people, steel is not just steel.
It's not, no.
And was very interesting too, as we get into build quality and the level of finishing on your products. You then turn around from the world time to create a chronograph. This one does have an Aventurine dial, true to its DNA.
Right.
But it has two meteorite dual graph subdials.
Absolutely. So it's actually the other way around. We made the Chronosport first and then the World Timer. That watch, the Chronosport, man, I sold that watch via Kickstarter. Our first 3 releases, the AVQ, the Sport Classic, and the Chronosport, were all via Kickstarter. The Travel Graph we launched on our own. We did a pre-order campaign and an event, and we launched it through that. But I was selling that watch on Kickstarter for something like $320.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that it was a great idea because I sold out of them. But once I got the bill from the manufacturer for the dials and all, I was like, damn, I should not have given that much of a discount.
Wow.
That was a very tricky watch to do. The other variants of the Chronosport, they're all great. I put a lot of work and time into all of them. But that one, man, so Aventurine, as I was mentioning earlier, it's brittle to begin with.
Yeah.
But you'll notice not only is it Aventurine, like Rashawn mentioned, it's got 2 meteorite subdials, which in effect from dial making perspective means you have to drill 2 large holes into an already brittle material.
Yes.
Then you'll also notice it has applied indices.
Yeah.
So you have to drill a bunch of more little holes into it to be able to fit the applied indices.
And there's also kind of like these rings around the subdials.
And, those also require little pinholes. And on top of that, there's also a date window.
Yes.
So making that dial was hell on earth. We already had the Chronosport design, but that dial took an extra year.
Wow.
Just from the first drawing of the Chronosport. We didn't even get the prototype for that watch until we were just about to deliver the rest of them.
Wow.
I really, that watch is very close to my heart. The Chronosport, we call that one the Starfield. And sort of the inspiration behind it is that the 2 meteorite subdials are like 2 planets and the Aventurine is space.
Yeah.
So it looks like 2 planets floating in space. And I love that watch. That's probably out of every watch I've made, that's the one that gets the most wrist time for me.
Wow.
The Travel Graph Constellation is catching up.
Yes.
It is also a much newer watch, but that's the watch that we've gotten the most praise on. That's the watch that people ask us to this day, can I buy one? And I'm like, I would love to sell you one, but you're a year and a half late to it.
So I have a selfish question.
Yeah.
How can I get one of these? Or how can anyone get one of these?
He just told you can't.
Yes, but that's will you ever kind of go back and dig into the archives and like repro,
maybe you auction off that one. Highest bidder.
Perhaps we might do we might do a charity auction if we could get one of them back from one of our customers. That's the display piece, so I have to show something at the shows and everything. What we've done since we've started is limited production.
Right.
Each watch we make 50 or 100 of them. The AVQ was our first run, so that was 500. But I want the watch to mean something. I want quality over quantity. So we make a few watches and we make sure we make them damn right. Let
me ask you, has pursuing this endeavor changed at all how you look at watchmaking as a collector?
Oh, absolutely. I look at stuff on the market. There's certain watches I see that are a certain price. And now that I know how much everything costs, how much these parts cost to make, I'm like, that's not worth it.
Yeah.
Or inverse, there are some watches that I'm like, damn, they're selling this for that cheap. And sometimes cheap is not even cheap, but you know what it costs to make it. And you're like, that's a good deal. There's one Swiss brand I'm not going to name. It's a brand that a lot of people dislike anyways, but they make a watch that's something like $20,000 with a Salida movement. And I'm like, look, I'm not somebody who's that nitpicky about the movement. Different watchmakers use different movements for different reason. At $20,000, you have no excuse to use a Salida movement.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's sort of, seeing how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
It sort of changes your perspective on what's out there. I mean, for example, I believe Patek uses 316L on the Nautilus and on their Aquanaut as well. So for me, it also like shows me what watches are a lot about branding, what watches are a lot about the design. I love Patek personally. I do still think that they're worth the money at retail. Absolutely. Not at market.
Yeah, no.
But a lot goes into it. You know, there are the surface level things like the materials. There are the surface level things like the design. But then you have to think about what it costs to get there. You know, what it took the brand to get there.
Because it's not even just manufacturing the piece. You talk about R&D, time and labor. Like, it's a lot.
And that's expensive. That costs in many cases millions, tens of millions of dollars. So I have a lot of respect. On one hand, like I said earlier, there's some watches where I look at it, I'm like, this should not be this expensive, no matter what. But there are other brands and other watches that I look at, I'm like, I see why this is this expensive. Even crazy expensive watches, you know, like there's some things that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's crazy for non-watch people or people who are not into it. It's easy to say that why would anybody spend $100,000 on a watch? But there's certain watches you look at and you're like, that's worth $100,000.
Yes.
The work, the effort that went into it. So it's really enlightened my perspective in my own collecting journey. I hate to use that word journey, but
it's appropriate.
It is appropriate. Like I feel like as somebody who buys watches as well, that's evolved a little bit since I've started making them. And it's interesting to see how that change came about.
What do your parents think about all this now that you've gone from this nerdy kid that knew and wanted, you know, a gold Daytona to now collecting Pateks and Rolexes, but also like, you know, making your own watches?
You know, I have to, again, I've mentioned him many times, but he's my biggest role model in life is my dad. My dad is kind of the person that got me into the collecting spirit. You know, like I mentioned, my dad is an art and antiquities collector, and I learned how to collect sort of through him. You know, I learned I watched how his tastes evolved over time. My dad is very supportive of this. My mom thinks it's ridiculous, you know? But my mom is like, really, you bought another watch, or really, like, you know, you could have eaten better food or lived in a better apartment if you didn't buy this watch.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, but I wanted it. You know, it's something I'm passionate about. It's something I love.
So funny.
My dad, you know, I'm still trying to get them into watches. They always joke. I talk a lot, and I know that, but at dinner and all that, I'm always talking about watches. Almost always.
Do they wear your watches?
Yeah, my dad has my watch. My mom, awesome. I don't make any watches small enough for my mom's wrist. Our watches are not gendered. I don't assign a male or a female to them. If you want to wear it. But they a lot of them do. They're not small. They're not big. You know.
Yeah. No, I feel like they're actually like a really good, like, I mean, if you want to say unisex size, like I think people with many, I mean, from all walks of life, but also like varying wrist sizes can wear these watches comfortably.
Yeah, and I'm blessed, you know, we have had a lot of women buy our watches, and I'm blessed that almost all of my family has at least one of my watches. All of my good friends have one of my watches too.
It's awesome.
It was really nice to go into this with the support of good people behind me, the support of friends, with the support of family. You know, I thought that when I was going to do this, I thought everybody was going to be like, you're crazy, you're stupid. Like, why are you doing this? Go back to software engineering. And I still do that. You know, I still do software engineering. I was surprised when people are like, Akbar, if there's one person who's going to do it, it should be you.
Right.
You know, you've been talking about this stuff since you were like 10 years old.
That's
like,
awesome.
You know what? Go make your watches. My dad is a very like shrewd guy with business and all that. And when I told him I was going to do this, I didn't ask him like, you know, I'm like, help me or anything like that. I was like, I'm going to do this, you know, whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not. And I was just waiting for my dad to be like, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But I was surprised that he was like, yeah, you should. My mom too. And they're both very like thoughtful people. They think a lot about their actions before they do them, but they supported me in it.
Well, I think it's obvious like how passionate you are.
Thank you.
They probably also know that whether they agree or not, you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're like, if anyone, again, to your point, like with your friends, if anyone's going to do it, he's going to get it done.
Yes.
I'm very stubborn. That's for sure.
Let me ask you, just wrapping up, you know, you've gotten this far. This is a really huge undertaking. Mm-hmm. You've had a lot of success, you know, in addition to a lot of challenges, right? You talk about like selling out piece after piece. You're still figuring out your pricing. Mm-hmm. But is this something that you hope to do full time?
You know, if I ever, and knock on wood, I get to that level, I would love to. You know, I enjoy every moment that I work on Lesablier. You know, there's some work that doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. You guys are doing this.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's what Lesablier is to me. Like, whenever I work on this company, I don't feel like I'm working. I feel like I'm having the best time in my life.
That's awesome.
So I would love to do this full time. I'd love to make more complex watches. I'd love to do more complications. You know, I'd love to take this brand to the next level.
What would be your dream complication?
That's a hard question to answer. But one of my favorite complications of all time, and I am working on one right now,
Okay.
is the jump hour.
Okay.
Actually, the first watch I ever sketched was a jump hour.
Yes.
And at the time, there wasn't much of an ability to make one. The watch that got me into it was the FP Jour Vagabondage.
Sure.
That's the first watch that I saw from the brand.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a weird watch to see from
It
the
is
brand.
a strange one.
But I saw it and I loved it. Just the fact that, you know, to people who don't know watches, it looks like a digital clock that you see in a hotel. You know, but it's way more than a Holiday Inn bedside clock.
Yeah.
Yes.
The work that goes into making a jump hour, I love that it's so simple, but what's behind the dial is not.
It's not at
Yes.
You know, the same thing with a deadbeat seconds watch.
Yes.
It looks like a quartz watch to people who don't know what it is, but what goes into it. So I am working on a jump hour, and that's one of my dream complications. I have many, but I would have to say that's up there for me.
Well, Akbar, we look forward to seeing that. I think you have a lot to be proud for.
Yes.
You know, I mean, getting to know you and seeing this endeavor that you've undertaken is really, really impressive. And it's the kind of thing that just kind of, you know, reinforces all of the things that I love about the watch community. The passion, the ingenuity, the creativity, the determination that it takes. And the other part is, you know, the fun that we get to have, just getting to know one another and geek out all of these things that we love.
Yes.
I want to say thank you for joining us this evening. This has been a lot of fun. We hope to have you back when you complete that jump hour.
Sounds
You're
good.
more than welcome. And maybe we'll get one for a wrist check pod. Who knows?
Yes.
Right?
That'd be nice.
It was a pleasure being here, guys.
Absolutely,
Thank
my
you for
man.
having me.
You guys know where to find us. We're on wristcheckpod.com, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio,
TikTok for the children.
TikTok for the children, Instagram, Amazon Music, etc.
And maybe one day in the metaverse.
Maybe one day in the Apple Vision Pros. Who knows? We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Deuces.
Peace.